Well, next up, Fourth Circuit. So for the non-lawyers listening, federal courts are divided into circuits. There are 11 circuits, I believe. I should know that. I feel like a lawyer should know that. Anyways, I think there's at least 11. And there's these federal circuits that go around the country. And what happens is you go to federal court in your state. Decision happens. You don't like it. You appeal. You have a right of appeal to the circuit court. You always get to go appeal to the circuit court. Circuit court makes a decision. If you don't like the circuit court's decision, you can ask the Supreme Court to take it. So it's 3 tiers, but the Supreme Court never has to take it, right? So we in North Carolina are in the Fourth Circuit, as is Virginia, our northern neighbor. And the Fourth Circuit just issued a ruling on North Carolina license plates. And what's been going on is that the state of North Carolina has been issuing license plates that have a pro-life message on them, but have been declining to issue license plates that have a pro-choice, pro-abortion message on them, right? And some groups, the ACLU, sued, said, you can't do that. You have to do both messages.
Right.
Which is wrong. But how this went down was originally the district court said, you're right, the government does have to issue both sets of licenses. If you're going to issue one, you have to issue the other. Well, the key distinction here is something called government speech versus private speech.
Okay.
So if the government's going to come to you, Demi, and they're going to say, you're not allowed to say something, right?
Yes.
Then they have to be neutral in how they moderate your speech.
Right.
And actually, if they're going to restrict your speech at all, they have to meet a pretty high standard in court. But they have to be neutral. But when the government speaks for itself, it is allowed to choose what messages it sends and what messages it doesn't send.
Right.
And you see this very clearly when you have, the extremely liberal executive branch we have right now in the federal government sends all kinds of messages all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And it would be silly to say you have to also send the conservative message too because we voted in liberals for better or for worse.
If after the Supreme Court ruled on gay marriage that the White House was not lit up in rainbow? I mean,
exactly. And that's a great example of government speech is when the White House was lit up in rainbows. Yeah. Nobody went to them and said, you have to also put forth a pro-traditional marriage message or something like that. So the district court originally said, yep, the state of North Carolina, the Department of Transportation has to issue pro-choice license plates, pro-abortion license plates, if it's going to issue pro-life license plates.
Right.
In the meantime, there was a case in Texas, and we had one of the groups that is always interesting in terms of constitutional law, the neo-Confederate groups that want to remember fondly the Confederacy, and some even want to bring it back. And I don't agree with them. Right. I think the Confederacy should stay dead where it is.
Yep.
But they have free speech, right? So if you want to go out and you want to say the Confederacy was great and here's why, then heck, you can do that. Well, this group called the Sons of the Confederacy, which is descendants of people who fought in the Civil War, wanted to have license plates on their cars that depicted a Confederate flag design. Okay. And the state of Texas said to them, no, the state of Texas does not condone the Confederacy. We do not condone the Confederate flag, and we will not put that symbol on license plates that we issue. We won't do it. And the Supreme Court said, yes, that's right. The state of Texas, you don't have to condone Confederacy. You don't have to condone that message. So, in light of that decision, the Fourth Circuit is now considering the North Carolina case.
That's interesting.
And in light of that decision, they came back to the North Carolina case and said, yeah, I guess in light of that, the state doesn't have to issue these pro-abortion license plates if it's going to also issue pro-life license plates. It can do one or the other.
Very good.
And it's just an interesting case. Now, interestingly enough, I haven't done a whole lot of research into this to really know their views because the ACLU was the one challenging the state of North Carolina on this. Right. And I believe the ACLU actually said that the state of Texas should have to allow Confederate license plates, which is interesting because the ACLU isn't.
Yeah.
I don't think the ACLU is like a front for the Confederacy, right?
Highly doubt it, but at least they're consistent.
So at least they're consistent, right? And that is one thing. There's a few things they have not been consistent on, like drones and such. But it is nice that they're at least consistent because the left in general is not consistent on this. The left in general says free speech as long as you say what we want. Right. And
convenient.
I mean, because the dissent in this case said, well, even though the Texas case said this, in North Carolina, they should have to give both messages.
I want to read that.
Oh, and they give all these, they say it's mixed public-private speech and all this stuff. what it really comes down to is that the dissenter in this case is a liberal judge. He didn't like the message that the Texas the Texas license plates are sending, but he likes the message that they want to put on North Carolina license plates.
So funny how you can pick and choose.
And important in court is when you're making these rules, you want clear rules.
Right.
So the Supreme Court has now set a clear rule. License plates, specialty novelty license plates, are government speech.
Right.
That is going to prevent so much unnecessary litigation in the future because now we all know. It's not, well, license plates are public-private when they're in this certain situation or whatever. We're going to save so much time, we're going to save so much money, and we have clear rules on what constitutes government speech and what doesn't. Mm-hmm. And if there is some issue that comes up in the future that's on the margins of this, like let's say, I don't know, the novelty insurance cards, I don't know, something the government issues to you, and they don't feel like it is similar enough to license plates to fall under the rule from Texas, well, then it'll go back up. But this is how law is made. This is how case law is made. So I know that's riveting.
I think it's interesting. No, it is interesting. I do want to read that dissent because I see those parallels, obviously, as a communications person with what we were just talking about with the Charlotte Observer. Like, you can, if they had been a newspaper that found out, like you said, that Tammy had been involved in some kind of, sex offender status, they would have slammed her. It would have been the front page of the Charlotte Observer.
Oh, yeah.
I would have a heck of a lot more respect for them if I knew that they would be consistent across the board. So consistency in liberal journalism is gone, as it is with liberal.
And that's one thing I will say about the Center for Law and Freedom is we are pursuing consistent principled litigation.
Right.
That is why my co-counsel in Charlotte on one of these cases, he's a wonderful young man named Christian Ayers. We disagree on pretty much everything that there is to disagree on. I've actually known Christian since I was like 4 years old. But he describes himself as so liberal that liberals think he's loony.
That's cool.
But we agree on public records. We agree on this issue when we go forward together. And we're trying to do that. And we also are filing a brief with the ACLU in the retention election case involving the election because we think that the legislature stepped out of line.
Exactly.
And we're really trying to pursue that because in cases like this, when people aren't consistent, it waters down their message when they really want to push their core goals. So if you want to read, by the way, the Fourth Circuit decision, you can go to nccivitas.org. I have a blog up entitled Fourth Circuit Rules in Favor of Pro-Life License Plates. It's on our blog, and I have links to the PDF of the Fourth Circuit decision and the dissent in that case, and sort of a brief summary of what was going on there. So feel free to go in there, read it, and if you have any questions, we'll be on the air till 3. You can call in 919-747-9421 and ask your questions about federal litigation.
Or tell us what you think.
Yeah, tell us what you think.